The rooster crowed low in the distance, cutting through the early hush of morning. Jonas Mbeki was already in the field, long before the sun made its way above the tree line. His boots sunk slightly into the damp soil, freshly watered by last night's rain. His fingers moved across the young corn stalks with the kind of tenderness a man reserves for things he's raised with love. He didn't need an alarm clock, not after 32 years on this land. He moved slow, deliberate, not because he was old, though age had crept into his knees, but because this field didn't deserve to be rushed. This field had carried his sweat, held his memories, and in the back corner under that old oak tree, it held his wife. Her name was Ruth, and she had loved this land as fiercely as he did. Even in her final days, she made him promise, "Jonas, you keep this place alive. You treat it like family." And he had. Every row, every crop, every fence post hammered with his own 2 hands, all done under the verbal promise made decades ago by old Mr. Charles Everett, the white landowner who never treated Jonas like a worker, but like a partner. Jonas could still remember the day Everett said it. "You keep this place running, Jonas, and one day it's yours. That's a promise." Jonas believed him, because back then, a man's word meant something. But today would be different. Just as he hoisted a basket of fresh okra into the wagon, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet. A sleek black car rolled to a stop at the edge of the property. Jonas narrowed his eyes. Out stepped Marla Everett, the late Mr. Everett's daughter. Sharp suit, expensive heels that didn't belong anywhere near a farm, and her husband Clayton, a man who carried arrogance like a cologne you could smell from miles off. They didn't even wave, just walked up like they owned the place. Jonas straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mornin'," he said, slow and polite. Marla didn't return the greeting. She glanced around with the air of someone inspecting a property she intended to flip. "Mr. Mbeki," she said flatly, "we're here to inform you that the estate will be reclaiming the land by the end of the month." Jonas blinked. "Excuse me?" Clayton stepped forward, a smirk crawling up his face. "You've had a good run, old-timer, but this land wasn't yours. There's no paperwork, no deed in your name. So, we'll have to ask you to vacate." Jonas's throat tightened. For a moment, he thought surely this had to be a mistake. A bad dream. "Your daddy gave me his word," Jonas said, voice steady but firm. 30 years I worked this land under that promise." Marla shrugged. "Then maybe you should have gotten it in writing." They turned and walked back to their car, as if they hadn't just shattered a man's entire world. Jonas stood still, staring down at the dirt beneath his feet, the same dirt he'd bled into, wept into, prayed into. And now they wanted to rip it away. But the land remembered, and Jonas Mbeki wasn't done fighting. The sun had long since risen, but the warmth never quite reached Jonas that day. He sat in his old rocking chair on the porch, the breeze swaying him gently, but his thoughts were heavy. The land stretched out before him, the same as it had every morning for over 3 decades. But now it felt like it was being pulled away inch by inch. Inside the house, the clock ticked louder than usual. Time was moving, and so were the Everetts. They'd given him 30 days. Jonas looked down at his weathered hands. They still worked. They still remembered every stone he pulled from that soil, every tool he sharpened, every fence he mended by lamplight. He glanced toward the old cedar chest inside the hallway closet, the one Ruth had kept locked. Something tugged at him, quiet but sure. Inside, he opened it slowly. The scent of aged cedar and time rose up like memory itself. Inside were folded quilts, old photographs, Ruth's Bible, and beneath that, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Jonas unwrapped it carefully. Inside were letters, handwritten notes from Mr. Everett over the years, quick messages of thanks, casual instructions. One in particular caught his eye. It was dated spring 1993. Jonas, your work continues to bless this land. When the time comes, the deed will be yours. This is your home as much as mine. You've earned that. It wasn't a legal document, but it was proof of intent. And in that moment, Jonas knew he wasn't crazy. He wasn't clinging to false hope. He just needed someone who could help him fight. That evening, his granddaughter Amina arrived, tall, sharp-eyed, still in her school teacher clothes. She hugged him tighter than usual. "Mama called me," she said they're trying to push you out. What's going on, Grandpa? Jonas handed her the letter. Amina read it in silence, jaw tightening. This is something. It won't win in court, but it's a start. Do you still have any of the old documents? Receipts? Letters? Anything else? Jonas nodded. Everything. Ruth saved it all. Amina smiled, half sad, half fire. Then we're gonna dig, Grandpa. We're gonna find something they can't ignore. Over the next few days, the house became a storm of old boxes, yellowed papers, and quiet determination. Amina searched through county archives, church records, agricultural grant listings, anything that might prove that Jonas had been more than just a worker. And then, she found it. At the back of an old manila folder marked Everett Holdings Drafts in the town records office, she uncovered an unfiled deed transfer draft. The document was dated 3 months before Everett's death. It named Jonas Mbeki as the beneficiary of the southern plot, 60 acres of farmland. But the document had never been signed and never filed. Worse, tucked into the folder was a post-it note, a quick memo from Clayton himself scribbled years ago. Everett's memory is slipping. Don't file anything without my review. Amina's blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. That night, she laid the evidence out on the kitchen table. Jonas stared at it, silent. He meant to make it mine, he said softly. I knew he did, but they buried it. Amina nodded. But we just unearthed it. She looked him in the eye. You gave your life to this land, Grandpa. Now we fight to give it back to you. The next morning, Amina arrived at the local newspaper office with a folder clutched tight against her chest. She walked in like a teacher on a mission, because that's exactly what she was. At first, the editor wasn't interested. Old property disputes were a dime a dozen, until she placed the documents on his desk. He read them, then read them again. Then he looked up. Is this who I think it is? He asked. That's Everett's signature. Amina nodded. And that's my grandfather, the man who worked that land for 32 years and was promised ownership. The promise was hidden, intentionally. The story hit the town paper 3 days later. Family land deal sparks. Accusations of betrayal and fraud. The headline sat above a photo of Jonas, standing tall beside his fields, holding the original letter from Everett. His face was lined with time, but his eyes held thunder. Within hours, the story spread across the county. Local TV stations picked it up. A local historian even confirmed Everett's pattern of verbal agreements with workers he trusted. Jonas was just the only one still standing. Meanwhile, in the Everett home, panic set in. Clayton sat with a whiskey in hand, watching the evening news. Marla paced. We should have burned that letter, she hissed. Clayton growled. It's not the letter. It's the draft deed. If that gets into court, she cut him off. You said it wouldn't hold up. You said it was just paper. Yeah, well, now it's evidence. Their calm was cracking, because Jonas hadn't just survived. He had become a symbol. Back at the Mbeki farmhouse, the once quiet porch had become a hub of energy. Neighbors began stopping by. Some dropped off old photos showing Jonas working the land with Everett. Others brought food, hugs, or memories. One man, Mr. Henry, a retired pastor, said something that stuck. This land remembers whose hands shaped it. The Everetts built fences. You built roots. That Sunday, Amina spoke at church. She held up the letter and the deed draft in front of the entire congregation. This isn't just about Grandpa Jonas. This is about the people who built this country, fed it, cared for it, and got pushed off it. But not this time. By the end of the week, a petition had reached over 10,000 signatures. Community leaders wrote letters to the court. The county land board scheduled an emergency hearing to review the case. Clayton tried to stall it, but the fire was lit. Jonas Mbeki, who had been quietly erased, was now the center of a storm. The courthouse was packed. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of farmers, neighbors, and families who had watched Jonas Mbeki till the same soil since before many of them were born. Some came out of respect. Others came because they knew. His story was their story too. Amina sat beside her grandfather, a thick folder of evidence on her lap. Jonas wore a freshly pressed shirt and the same boots he'd worked the fields in for years. He said they were lucky boots. Across the aisle, Marla and Clayton Everett sat stiffly, a team of lawyers flanking them. Their perfect world, built on silence and assumption, was about to face the voice of truth. The judge, a black woman named Judge Evelyn Monroe, presided with sharp eyes and a calm voice that commanded the room without ever raising it. We're here today to determine the contested ownership and rightful claim to 60 acres of farmland worked by Mr. Jonas Mbeki, formerly under the late Charles Everett. The hearing began. Clayton's lawyers leaned into the technicalities. There was no formal deed signed, no transfer filed, no financial record of sale. The land belongs legally to the Everett estate. The judge nodded. Understood. Let's hear the other side. Amina rose, voice clear but full of restrained fire. She laid out the timeline, the verbal promise, the letter written in Everett's hand, the unfiled draft deed found in county records. She even presented Clayton's handwritten note telling the clerk to withhold filing due to Everett's mental state. Then came the bombshell. We subpoenaed financial records, Amina said. Clayton Everett used the Everett Land Trust to redirect inheritance funds and altered multiple estate documents, including this one. She held up a document stamped with dates that didn't match the trust records. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Clayton stood. This is outrageous. That man, he pointed at Jonas, was a field hand, a helper, nothing more. Jonas stood slowly. The room went still. That land was mine and everything but ink, Jonas said. I gave it life. I buried my wife on it. I raised crops so that his father could profit. He promised me the deed, but even if he hadn't, I earned it with every sunrise and every drop of sweat I left in that dirt. The judge watched him closely. Then she turned to Clayton. Did your father, Charles Everett, ever rescind his verbal promise to Mr. Mbeki? Clayton fumbled. No, but he never signed. Answer the question. Clayton sank into silence. After a long pause, Judge Monroe spoke. It is the judgment of this court that a fraudulent suppression of rightful transfer took place. The unfiled deed draft, paired with documented intent and supporting evidence, establishes the land was meant to be gifted as promised. The court hereby transfers ownership of the contested 60 acres to Mr. Jonas Mbeki. The courtroom erupted. Applause, tears, laughter, a weight, decades deep, finally lifted. Clayton and Marla stood frozen, as if they'd been stripped of something they never truly owned. Jonas looked to Amina. We did it, she whispered. He smiled softly. Number. The land did it. It remembered who kept it alive. The gate creaked as it swung open. Jonas stepped back onto the land he had poured his soul into. Not as a worker, not as a tenant, not as a memory, but as the rightful owner. The court ruling had been delivered just 5 days ago, but today, With the paperwork signed and the land registered under the Mbeki name, Jonas was finally home. The farmhouse still stood, a little weathered, a little tired, like him, but it stood, and so did he. Out in the fields, volunteers from the community had come together to replant rows that had been left to dry when the dispute began. Children from the local school had painted signs. One of them read, "Welcome home, Mr. Mbeki." Amina walked beside him, arm in arm. She had tears in her eyes, not just for the victory, but for the way her grandfather's quiet resilience had lit a fire in an entire town. "You know," she said, "they want to do a documentary about this." Jonas chuckled. "Tell them to bring gloves. We got beans to plant." A small ceremony was held that afternoon at the edge of the field, the same spot where Ruth had been laid to rest beneath the oak tree. The town pastor said a few words, but most of the speaking came from neighbors, farmers, teachers, elders, who all shared what Jonas had meant to them. Then came the final act. Jonas, Amina, and a few others stepped forward to plant a young fruit tree, an old tradition where land was passed on, not just in title, but in roots. As Jonas knelt to place the seedling in the soil, he paused. The wind was still, the moment was holy. "This here," he said, "ain't just for me. It's for every soul that ever poured sweat into soil they didn't own, hoping the next generation might." He patted the earth gently. "And it's for Ruth." She said, "Treat the land like family. Now it's official." As the sun dipped low over the Mbeki farm, golden light blanketed the fields. The farmhouse windows glowed. Laughter carried from the porch, and in the distance, the newly planted tree stood like a promise kept, silent, rooted, and proud. Because in the end, truth had a harvest of its own, and it had finally come home. Some stories don't make the headlines. They're buried, under dirt, under silence, under lies. But truth always finds its way back to the light. If this story touched your heart, help it reach someone else. Like it, share it. And if you believe more voices like Jonas Mbeki's deserve to be heard, subscribe. Because here, every story grows roots.